Welcome to this public forum with the candidates for Legislative District 7. I'm Onessa Pfeiffer-Johnson with the League of Women Voters, and I will be your moderator. This candidate forum has been organized by the League of Women Voters of Bismarck-Mandan, the Bismarck Tribune, and is co-sponsored by Dakota Media Access. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that promotes the informed participation of all citizens in their government. The League does not endorse or oppose candidates or political parties. All 6 candidates for North Dakota's Legislative District 7 have joined us here tonight. They are Nicole Pullman, Tom Kelsch, Jason Doctor, Warren Emmer, Rick Becker, and Warren Larson. The audience is invited to submit questions using the index cards provided to you. Viewers at home can phone in questions by calling 355-1312 between now and 6:45 p.m. tonight only, Thursday, October 18th. That number again is 355-1312. This is intended to be a respectful exchange of ideas. Our purpose this evening is to provide voters with information about the candidates and their positions on issues that affect North Dakota and the District 7. Now let's meet our candidates. You will each have 90 seconds to introduce yourselves and tell us why you are running for North Dakota's Legislative District 7. Ms. Pullman, you're first.
Hello, my name is Nicole Pullman. I am the Republican-endorsed candidate for the Senate in District 7. I am a teacher by trade. I have been teaching for 15 years. I enjoy it very much. I am currently teaching English at Century High School, go Patriots, and I have been involved in education not only as a teacher but also from a policy standpoint. Governor Hoeven and then Governor Dalrymple both appointed me to the Education Commission of the States, so I have been involved in that nonpartisan organization that takes a look at education policy and reform across the country and takes a look at what challenges we face and tries to address those challenges. I also have a real personal connection to education. I'm a wife and a mom of 3 kids who go to Centennial Elementary School and Horizon Middle School. So education is something that's really important to me. I am also a small business owner. We're partners in the Blarney Stone downtown. We are excited to be part of the revitalization of the downtown area. So I decided to run because I felt like I could speak for a number of people. And because after 20 years of being behind the scenes in many different campaigns, I had really become fed up with the negative tone that politics had taken in this country. And I just wanted to be a candidate who remembers that it's about respectful debate and civility. And I'm really appreciative of this opportunity because this forum is exactly what that's all about. And so I'm excited to be here and thankful.
Thank you. Mr. Kelsch.
Hi, my name is Tom Kelsch. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for inviting us out tonight. You know, I had best of both worlds growing up. Small town, southeastern North Dakota, it's a farming community. I think there's maybe 52 people left in town, and there's a bar and an elevator. And then up here in Bismarck, Mandan area, I got a little bit of best of both worlds there. I got interested in public service probably a long, long time ago. I say that like I'm real old or something, but I must have been 7 or 8 years old. I remember I'd taken a trip to Bismarck with my mom and my dad and come up to visit my grandpa, who happened to be a state senator at the time. We got up to the Capitol, and I run up to him and give him a hug, and I sit on his lap, and I'm sitting on his desk, and I remember thinking to myself, you know what, one of these days I'm going to be doing something like this. And I feel that now is the time that District 7, people in Lincoln, everyone in there, has somebody that's enthusiastic and can bring a fresh taste to the legislature. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Doctor.
Hi, I'm Jason Doctor, and I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters also for putting this on this evening. I'm a Bismarck native. I'm married, have 2 children. One of my kids attends the University of North Dakota. The other one is a junior at Bismarck High School. I'm a small business owner, and that's one of the reasons why that I feel I would help out the legislature, knowing small business and bringing ideas to the state with this surplus. We do not need the government to grow, but we also have to have ideas to give the infrastructure out west and to build on economics so our future generations have the prosperity that we currently have and to sustain it for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Emmer.
Hi, I'm Warren Emmer. I'm running for the Senate from District 7. I also thank you folks for putting this forum on. I think it's really important. My wife Leanne and I live near the river, north of the pumpkin patch. In '98, we cleared our own lot, built our house, and we're still there. We have 2 grown daughters, 6 grandchildren, and I have a son-in-law in Afghanistan right now, serving our country. I'm a graduate from the University of Wisconsin. I'm a law enforcement person, so I have 2,600 hours of certified training in law enforcement. I'm a licensed social worker, retired law enforcement officer, and retired corrections officer. I'm proud to say that I had a number of endorsements. One was from the North Dakota Education Association, so I was really pleased to get that. I worked for 3 decades in law enforcement and corrections. I've moved up through the ranks. I became the chief parole officer, and then at the end of my career with the Department of Corrections, I actually managed both the prisons and the Division of Parole and Probation. The last 20 years of my career, I worked very closely with the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive branch, and helped craft public policy. In fact, 10 legislative sessions I testified. And I'm looking for your vote. I want to be the senator from District 7, and thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Becker.
Thanks, Vanessa. I'd like to also thank the league for this opportunity. It's a very valuable forum. I'm originally from Mandan. I am, by the way, real background running for the House of Representatives on the Republican ticket. I'm from Mandan. I've been living in Bismarck for 15 years now. Plus resurgent small business owning. And I too have been involved in some of the downtown revitalization. I have 4 kids attending Century High, Bismarck State College, and the University of North Dakota. Over these last 15 years, I've had several experiences I think will help me become a very effective legislator. And among others, I would say those include being on the Bismarck Planning and Zoning Commission, being on the Council of Legislative Affairs for the North Dakota Medical Association, several others I think that give good insight into the things that we're looking at now. As far as why I'd like to run, oddly, I think that having a booming economy and a surplus in the budget is a time of critical need, because what we need from the legislators is restraint, respect for the taxpayers' dollars, and I guess the wisdom to know what to do, when to do it, and what's going to be best for the city.
Thank you. Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'm Warren Larson. I'm running for the House in District 7. Appreciate this opportunity as well to be with you tonight. I'm a lifetime educator. Began my career as a teacher, moved into becoming a principal, and ended my career as a superintendent of schools in Williston just a number of years ago. I also am endorsed by a North Dakota Education Association. My political career began when I was a little kid. I learned politics from my grandpa on the farm. Grandpa was Republican, uncle was Democrat. Needless to say, when we were hauling bales, the hay hooks were flying and the words were going all over the place. Grandpa kept talking about this guy named Ike that I thought was a neighbor, and I wanted to meet him, and I discovered later it was President Eisenhower that he kept referring to, and then I also later learned that that was what my middle name was named after. So my middle name is Dwight after President Eisenhower, which I'm certainly proud of. Currently, I'm married to my wife, Kathy, who's in the audience. I was fortunate to have a stepson, Chris, out of that marriage. Chris and his wife, Nikki, live here in Bismarck. They both work in Bismarck, and we were truly blessed 2 months ago to have twin baby grandchildren born. So hi to Paige and Piper out there in TV land. I think at 2 months old, they're probably not watching tonight, but that's okay. We're fortunate because November 6th is coming up. November 6th is a pretty significant date for us. And I think it's important that the voters look at us as candidates and make their vote on November 6th.
Thank you. Thank you. And now we'll move on to the questions developed by the League of Women Voters and the Bismarck Tribune, our audience here tonight, and our viewers at home. To submit a question, please use the index cards provided on your chairs. Viewers at home can phone in questions by calling 355-1312 between now and 6:45 p.m. tonight, Thursday, October 18th. That number again is 355-1312. Candidates have not been given advance copies of the questions, and our format tonight will require that after 3 candidates have answered a question, the next candidate in order will receive a new question with the option to address any previous question that they so choose. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to any question they choose. Please comply with our time restrictions so we can get to as many questions as possible tonight. Our timer will let you know when you're down to 30 seconds, then 10 seconds, then stop, and then I will interrupt you with a thank you for your thoughts. Again, I invite our in-house audience to submit questions. On to our first question prepared by the League of Women Voters. North Dakota's budget surplus has everyone talking. What do you believe is the highest priority and the best uses for these uncommitted tax dollars?
That really is the question of the day as we go into this next session. My first priority would be to invest in the West. I think that we need to take care of a couple of things in the West. First, we need to take care of safety. We want to make sure that we have safe roads, that we have increased law enforcement, that we have paid EMTs who are able to be called 24 hours a day. Right now, we still seem to depend on some volunteers, and that's proving to be difficult. And so safety is a major concern in the West. We also need to invest in the infrastructure to take care of that industry, to maintain it. I think that we'll see action in the Bakken for a very long time, and so our investment on the front end will help promote our economic stability on the back end. So first, I would invest in the West. Secondly, I want to return that money to the taxpayers through property tax relief. And so I want to make sure that the voters understand that I will vote for the most property tax relief or reform that we can afford that is sustainable. I want it to be permanent. I don't want us to come back in the next biennium and say, oh, I'm sorry, we gave you a little bit too much relief. So anything that is as much as we possibly can give them that is permanent, that's what I would advocate for in terms of returning money to the taxpayer. And then we have to save money. There is plenty of money to be saved and accounts that have been set up by the Constitution to do so. So invest, return, and save.
Thank you. Mr. Kelsch, the North Dakota budget surplus has everyone talking. What do you believe is the highest priority and best uses for these uncommitted tax dollars?
The highest priority, I think, would be to invest in the infrastructure within the state itself. Not just the West is seeing the pains from everything. The city of Lincoln, District 7 itself, is seeing more and more growth through people moving into the city, moving into our district. Statewide, it's that way. I think the most important thing we do is invest in the infrastructure statewide, roads, sewer, police, and make sure the local governments are asking for the proper amount of money that they need. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Doctor.
My number one priority would be infrastructure in the West. I've been talking to people when I go door to door, and I tell them it's the golden goose. We need to take care of the golden goose. If we take care of the infrastructure needs, and that includes roads, more highway patrol, we need to keep our citizens safe. There's a lot of crime that is increased from every time you have prosperity. So you also have other problems that do arise from prosperity. Tax relief is another priority of mine. There are several proposals that the legislature wants to present in 2013, and I would support the proposal that's the most efficient and effective way to get the taxpayer dollars back to the citizens who paid those monies to begin with. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Emmer, I'll be posing the next question to you, and you can answer this question as well as respond to the previous one if you have something.
All right, thank
Okay.
you.
Voters defeated an attempt to ban property tax, but there's general agreement that adjustments are needed in the state's tax structure. Sales, income, and property taxes. What do you propose?
Well, it was clear last spring when the voters did vote on Measure 2 that they didn't want to totally throw the baby out with the bathwater when it come to property tax. But when I'm walking around our District 7, that is probably the number one conversation people want to have is property tax relief. And so clearly property tax relief is important. There are so many different ideas out there, and I think the legislature, when they come together, will probably get together on one specific plan. But the one I like best is where the first $100,000 of your taxable valuation is bought down by the state. And I think that's a fair process, and everybody in the state could get something like that. So I favor that. But you know, looking at the entire tax structure, it might be time to look at sales tax. I know there's some people talking about that as well. Do we really need sales tax at the level it is today? And that could be reduced. And so there'll be lots of conversations, I'm sure. But one of the things I absolutely agree with Nicole Pullman is we have to preserve some for later. We can't go back and say we made a mistake and now we need to come back and reassess, and by the way, your taxes are going to go up. So that's how I see it. And as far as infrastructure, public safety, and kids are all important, not just out west, but in Bismarck, answering that first question.
Thank you. Mr. Becker. Voters defeated an attempt to ban property tax, but there's general agreement that adjustments are needed in the state's tax structure, sales, income, and property taxes. What do you propose?
I absolutely agree that something is needed. Property tax with Measure 2 last year, I think was really interesting. I think it had some significant pros to it. However, I think with the property tax, we need reform, major reform. Relief is probably best going to be served by reducing personal or corporate income tax or sales tax. Now, the property tax could have some relief and reform by doing a couple of things. The exemption of the first of $8,000, having the opportunity for someone who's a senior and been in their home for many years to not have to pay property tax any longer or reduce property tax. Someone who's been an owner occupant for many years to have the same benefits. One of the major concerns I have is a buy down, which was done in 2009, possibly proposed again this year, is that just is shifting the payment from one pool to another pool. And the real reform needs to come by having the state perhaps induce the local taxing authorities to decrease the mills when the property values go up. Right now, as the property values go up, taxes go up, yet citizens can say, yes, I'm okay with my taxes going up. Enforce that, it forces transparency, and I think that's where real reform can start. The buy down is nice, it makes us feel good, I think it's a Band-Aid approach, and it's temporary.
Thank you. Mr. Larson.
There's lots of issues to be dealt with in tax. Sales tax, of course, could be bought down. That will allow some other entities to look at it and certainly help the people. Income tax is minimal in North Dakota as it is, but it is an option. Supplanting specials that cities and counties put out also has been an option that's been talked about. But property tax is probably the buzzword today, and probably the area where we're going to look at most seriously as we move into legislative session. That being said, what I've continually heard walking door to door since April is you got to do something about property tax. Most everyone has a concern with that. My thought is I want to keep it simplistic. I've seen too many property tax bills in the past that are 30, 40, 50, 60 pages with graphs all over, and I don't know if I totally understand them, and that kind of concerns me, and maybe there's a reason why I shouldn't understand it. I'm not sure, but I get wary of that. So I think the simplistic approach, as was mentioned, $100,000 off the top. Senior citizens was talked about. Senior citizens, as their expenses grow up, their income doesn't grow. So we need to have a buy down as they get older, then that tax comes down commensurate with them. Both of those options, simplistically, I think, are the way we need to go.
Thank you. We'll be skipping you, Ms. Pullman, and moving on to Mr. Kelsch. In the oil patch, in many parts of the state, young families have limited access to child care because of cost and availability. What should the legislature do to address this issue?
Childcare is a big issue within the state. Obviously, more so in the oil patch with everyone moving in. The schools can't handle everybody out there. Currently, the state is only meeting 41% of childcare needs. Something needs to be done. I agree 100%. However, we need to talk to the people providing these daycares and find out what their needs are and decide on the best possible decision from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Noctor.
As being a small business owner, I'm a firm believer of free enterprise. If I would be in the legislature, I would like to see tax incentives, different pro-business initiatives to enhance and to help out people who would otherwise not think about going into daycare service as a vehicle with these incentives, so that it would relieve the problems that we have with daycare, because our children are our future and we need to take care of them. And by giving these incentives to people in North Dakota, I think it will spur the idea to start their own daycare and help relieve the problem.
Thank you. Mr. Emmer.
I've recently seen a statistic from Williston that just shocked me, that a healthy community, if they have 50% available daycare, they're about right, because about the other half is in a home daycare of some type. And they're sitting at 9% in Williston. Now, if you were a young family planning on relocating, would you send and relocate to Williston, North Dakota with your wife and children when you can't find daycare? I think part of the problem that happened, why the schools didn't see the enrollment increase that they thought they were going to in Williston, was that fact. A lot of these folks aren't there. We're knocking on doors in District 7 with people answering the door and saying, my husband's working in Williston. And so there's a real concern. And what happens when the oil leaves if the person is just a transient worker? So I agree, we have to incentivize somehow and encourage people to develop daycares in these hard-pressed communities. And that's going to be a real challenge. One of the things that we looked at one time in the Department of Corrections, and maybe it's time to revisit it when I worked at the Department of Corrections, is to develop and build portable daycare centers or small buildings that could be used for daycare centers at the prison with prison labor and send them out there. We have to think out of the box. When you only have 9% available daycares in the city of Williston, we have problems. And so we will have to try to address that issue. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Becker, you'll be first on this question. In the last legislative session, lawmakers tweaked funding for teachers' pensions without resolving the long-term health of the retirement fund. What more needs to be done to bring stability to teachers' retirement?
Well, that's a great question. I am in favor of a defined contribution type system. I know that we have obligations, and we need to uphold those obligations that we've made to our teachers, to all public employees. But what we are looking at with any benefit defined plan is holding the next generation responsible for it. We are allowing a benefit to happen currently, but then waiting and allowing the tab to be picked up by our children and our grandchildren. Now, if we are not able to somehow resolve this issue when we have a budget surplus, we'll never be able to resolve it. When things maybe are slowing down with the Bakken, whether it's 2 years or 200 years, at some point, we'll be able to look back and say, I cannot believe we didn't take those opportunities to reform the system, to take the burden away from our children and grandchildren, and just have the wherewithal to do it ourselves, to stand up for what's right, and just get it done.
Thank you. Mr. Larson.
Thank you. The Teachers Fund for Retirement certainly is something that I know a lot about. I've dealt with it a great deal, and I testified in regards to it in the last couple sessions. The defined benefit obligation is something that I believe very strongly should be kept in place. It's something that we've been assured we would have all of our career. Teachers' pay is near the bottom of the barrel nationally right now, and it's the one ray of hope that we have at the end of the tunnel. We know that we will have some type of a retirement plan that we can rely on as we get to near the end. I had a principal retire a few years ago, and he told me that he was happy and sad. He was 59 years old. He was retiring. His son at 24 was taking his first job, and he was going to make more money than he was making when he retired. He said, "Thank God I have a decent retirement system." With those thoughts, I think we have to keep the defined benefit. We have to put some dollars into it right now, and it will grow its way back up again.
Thank you. Ms. Pullman?
Well, as a teacher, I am part of this, and so I also have a father who is collecting a pension right now. I know how important that pension is to him, and I want to make sure that we take care of those who are currently in the system. There is a significant unfunded liability that makes it difficult to reform it. I can talk a little bit about, from an education policy standpoint, why the defined benefit is problematic. One difference between the public employees and the teachers is that public employees have more of a portability than teachers do. We don't have portability. If I were to retire right now or to get out of teaching right now, I would essentially lose over half the money that's been set aside for me because that would have to stay in the pension. And so it makes it difficult for teachers to leave teaching because you can't get that level of retirement. And as we look forward to evaluating teachers, to telling teachers maybe they're not effective and telling them that maybe this isn't the profession for them, it's awfully difficult to tell a teacher, "I'm sorry, you've been identified as ineffective, and now you're not only going to lose your job, but you really have a minimum retirement account as well." I would like us to be forward-thinking and proactive. How can we change it for the younger generation to make it portable, to make it better from an education policy, quality education policy standpoint?
Thank you. Mr. Kelsch, we'll be skipping you and moving on to Mr. Doctor. Mr. Doctor, this is an audience question. What is your position on defined benefit versus 401k for state employees?
I used to, before I was a small business owner, I was a lobbyist, and I actually worked with the Retired Teachers Association, so I'm very familiar with the pension plan. The defined benefit plan currently is underfunded. In order for the state to go to a 401k between teachers and state employees, they would have to inject approximately $900 million. I would like to see a hybrid system between a defined benefit and a 401k because portability issues is a big concern. And we do have an obligation to state employees. And so by having a hybrid, people who do want to stay on a defined benefit plan, the pension that they know they have a guarantee, they can do that. But then also have a plan where younger people can opt in to a 401k system, so if they do leave state employment, they can take the retirement plan with them.
Thank you. Mr. Emmer, what is your position on defined benefit versus 401k for state employees?
Well, I struggle with how to answer this because I've got 32 years as a state employee, and I recently retired from the state government. My wife, sitting in the back, has got 36 years of employment with the state, and she's still working, which is helpful. She gets the health care, and thanks, Dick Deaver, for that. I appreciate it. But seriously, as a state employee, having been a state employee for a long time, knowing full well that we went for years and years and years without any pay raises, most state employees, if you ask them, and I would fall in the same category, are saying we worked for less because we knew a good pension was coming at the end. And that there are so many people that would feel just absolutely betrayed if that was taken away from them. Now, somewhere down the road, I can understand, and when you're doing numbers, there may be a point where new employees couldn't be maintained on a defined benefit plan. But as it stands now, for all the existing employees, the state employees, that was part of what they expected when they got there, and I think we should uphold that promise and keep state employees working. Because keep this in mind. Right now, they can go just about anywhere and get work. And a lot of those folks, if you look at the DOT, they quit the DOT. They go out into the oil fields, and they get about a $10,000 pay raise right at that time. So I favor the defined benefit plan.
Thank you. Dr. Becker?
How's my new mic working?
Much better,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Well, I already hit on the defined, if I was able to be heard, defined benefit versus defined contribution. So I'd like to go back to question number 1 with regard to the budget surplus, uncommitted dollars, and priorities. And I would say I agree with essentially everyone on the panel here, and probably every legislator running. We need to understand and accept that there has to be significant expenditure for infrastructure, for staffing, for safety issues, a lot of things that come along with what's happening in the West, but also relate to anywhere in the state. One of the things that I want to sort of maybe separate myself from that train of thought is to acknowledge that with a significant surplus and the boom, people, agencies, special interest groups view the governor's office and the legislature as a soup kitchen. And they're all going to stand in line with a bowl, wanting it filled. And I view my job as requiring that before they get that bowl filled, they prove to me that they need it, that it's worthwhile, that they will be frugal with it, and that they can't already accomplish what they're intending to with what they have. And it's not because I'm stingy or greedy. It's because it's not my money. It's their money, and it's their money. And I have the respect for the hard work that they did to spend it wisely. My time's up.
Thank you. And Mr. Larson, you get the next question. The 3 affiliated tribes had the foresight to plan for a refinery which was recently permitted by the Department of the Interior. Would you support a state-owned or supported refinery to help to keep more of the Bakken oil from being shipped out of the state?
Clearly, that's something that's very important to the state of North Dakota and could certainly impact especially farmers in a very positive way. So I definitely would support that with great gusto. I worked, when I worked for Senator Dorgan as his deputy state director, I worked with a group from Williston that was beginning to put together an oil refinery process. Interestingly, none have been put together in the United States for a number of years. These were modular units that you could put together quite easily, were made in California. It would have made a great difference for western North Dakota, especially for farmers when we run into times when we're having shortages of fuel and transportation is certainly struggling as well. It's not going to change the price of a gallon of gas because that's a worldwide market. We don't control that no matter what we try to do. But it certainly would make availability a lot better for our people, and I would support it totally. And I would try to see if legislatively we could create incentives that would help them as well.
Thank you. Ms. Pullman?
I would be very supportive of an additional refinery. Any of the process that we can keep here in North Dakota is only going to be good for our economic stability in the long run. That's an easy answer.
Thank you. Mr. Kelsch?
Well, I can't disagree with any of them. The more jobs we're able to create here in North Dakota, keep the North Dakota people here, makes our state better to begin with. Personally, I worked in the oil field for a little while, and I saw all the truck traffic, trucks going, leaving. All I saw was the amount of oil that come out of these oil rigs. Every one of it left. Most of you guys probably seen Heidi's commercial with the rail cars, all the oil leaving. So a state-owned refinery on through affiliated tribes land or any refinery in the state of North Dakota, I think would be a positive thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Doctor, you're off the hook for this question. We're moving on to Mr. Emmer. North Dakotans have watched oil development industrialize the western third of the state as companies have begun to tap the Bakken formation. Is the state doing enough to protect the environment, both public and private, in the oil patch? And to piggyback on that previous question, if we did build a refinery, would our environmental protections change?
Well, the people I talk to out west, and I used to be a parole officer out in Dickinson. I have a lot of friends still working in the oil field. They all tell me, everyone's told that our environment's being protected, but really it's not. There's oil being spilt out in creek beds. There's just, and we find these things out so late, and that's such a fragile economy out there, and it's such a fragile environment out there that I really concern myself with that. So my first job, I think, if I was elected to the legislature, is to get as much information as I could from state agencies to see how we are doing on regulation, and do we need some additional help. And certainly, they're going to be coming before the legislature with appropriations requests. And it would be, I think, incumbent on any legislator to quiz them carefully to make sure that we are filling the needs to protect our environment out there. I think that to piggyback now, as you said, on the refinery, if we were to put a refinery in North Dakota, I think that would solve a lot of problems. I have a twin brother. I know that's hard to believe, but I do. And he and I used to pheasant hunt out west all the time, and he hasn't been back home for a long time. He was out there because they're planning on putting a concrete manufacturing plant somewhere out west. He couldn't believe what those roads looked like. He just couldn't believe what was happening out there. The truck traffic is unbelievable. So having a refinery here would solve a lot of our problems.
Thank you. Dr. Becker?
Yes. The short answer is yes. I think that we are doing enough now. That is in regard to what a legislature will do. So to set regulations, laws, and so forth, I think that we are doing enough. I think that staffing can be improved, and that's something that we can look at as well. With regard to the refinery, I don't have much more of a comment than what's been said. We would impose the same types of regulations, hopefully somewhat limited, beyond what the feds already are requiring to actually make it happen and make it profitable for the state. I'd like to go back briefly to question 2 regarding property tax, which I touched on somewhat already with question 1, but I think that it's important for the people of North Dakota to realize that the property taxes is under the purview of their local taxing authority. It's going to be the city commission, the county commission. And if they want this relief, if they want people held accountable, they have those people, they vote for them. They need to hold their commissioners responsible. The state legislature can help in somewhat. It can reform, it can do a lot of things, but what we don't want is to go to a higher level to say, help me out, pay for things, because then you lose the transparency, you lose the control. And in fact, that's one of the biggest reasons why Measure 2 was defeated, because of a fear of loss of control. So to have the state take over everything, to have the city and county commissioners avoid the responsibility that they have to their constituents is not the best way to go.
Thank you. Mr. Larson?
I believe that we're not doing enough to protect our landscape. I have friends who live in the northwestern part of the state that had salt water dumped in their coulee. They called the state, said, can you do something? No, we don't have enough people to come up. Will you take pictures and send down to us? Eventually, it got stopped. Eventually, a fine was levied, which later was reduced. I worry about the landscape. I worry when the drilling is done, when the pumpers are quiet, are we going to be able to remember what Governor Link said to us, when the landscape is quiet again? What are we going to have left? I worry.
Thank you. Ms. Pullman, if elected, what legislation would you first propose, draft, or co-sign?
Well, one piece of legislation that I have already thought about came about from going door to door and learning that some people in my district saw their property tax bill go up 60, 80, even 120% in 1 year. And I just thought, that is so wrong, because these people were living in homes that didn't have a high value, and they're on a fixed income, and I was incredibly concerned that this can just happen and they're just expected to pay it. And so one idea that I have, and at the last count I heard there are 15 different bill drafts about property taxes, but I would like to see a limit on the amount a property tax bill can go up in 1 year. I'm throwing out the number 20% because anything higher than that to me seems unreasonable. In 1 year, your property taxes should not double. And so that would probably be one of my first priorities.
Thank you. Mr. Kelsch, if elected, what legislation would you first propose, draft, or co-sign?
If elected a legislator to propose, draft, co-sign any piece of legislation, I think I'd have to meet with the city, local governments to find out exactly what their needs are first and help them make the money easier to get from the state. Therefore, we can continue to grow our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Doctor?
I would also like to propose my first legislation, a bill, just like Nicole's, having constituents having this concern, to have a system in place that people, they don't have such a burden with their property tax. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous to have 50, 75, 100% in 1 year. Having some limitations, it could be 20%, 15%, whatever the number is. But we need to protect our citizens and also try to find out, try to get back as much of their tax dollars to them would also be part of that legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Emmer, we'll be skipping you in this question, and we'll be, write it down, you'll be getting time in a little bit. Dr. Becker, this is your question. How do you differ most from your counterparts running from the other party?
That's a difficult question because I don't truly know who they are exactly as far as political philosophy. I can guess based on the party. What I would say is that as a representative of the Republican Party, I'm truly fiscally conservative. As you've heard me say through some of the other answers to the questions, I respect very much that the citizens of North Dakota work very hard for their money. I'm an absolute firm believer that if you let people keep their money, they can spend it much more wisely than the government, and they can spend it in a manner which will be a much stronger economic engine than the government ever could dream of. So my goal would be to let people keep their money, and I respect that a great deal. I guess I would just touch on another question too with regard to sponsoring legislation. As you might guess, I would be very much in favor of sponsoring or be a co-sponsor on legislation which would force transparency with property taxes in the local taxing authorities. I would be hopefully very involved with any of legislation that deals with the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, affectionately known as Obamacare. I was very pleased, and I attended the special session in December where it was voted down to have a state-sponsored exchange for a reason which I would love to talk about, but I don't have 30 minutes, as well as doing the other things to minimize and mitigate the downside of Obamacare.
Thank you. Mr. Larson, how do you differ most from your counterparts in the other party?
Well, as was just mentioned, it's difficult. I'm not one to be critical of other people, so I won't be. I will tell you what I can bring to the table. I believe that my administrative experience as a superintendent of schools in one of the larger school districts in North Dakota certainly will bring to the table a great deal of expertise and guidance as we move ahead. I believe that my leadership qualities within my own vocation are evident. I believe that my experience with the legislators is probably unparalleled in many ways at the table. I've spent many, many years working with the legislators, especially during the equity and the adequacy times when I practically lived there. I spent a great deal of time during the equity and the adequacy issues that we dealt with when we rewrote the funding formula and certainly changed K-12 education when I worked directly with Governor Hoeven and worked probably hundreds of hours with Lieutenant Governor Dalrymple, working across the table on both sides as we went along. The experience in the legislature, the experience as an administrator, all I think certainly put me out in front, I hope, in this race.
Thank you. Ms. Pullman, how do you differ most from your counterparts running from the other party?
Well, as I said in the beginning, I think that everyone sitting here wants the same thing. We want a better community, we want a better state, we want a better country. We may have a slightly different philosophy as to how we get there. We might have a slightly different philosophy as to the role of government and how we get there. I like to see the private sector try to take care of problems and individuals try to take care of problems before the government steps in. And so I think that that's the one philosophical difference that you might see between the two groups.
Thank you. I'm going to continue this question for you, Mr. Kelsch, Dr. and Emmer. If elected, what legislation would you, that was it. How do you differ? How do you differ most from your counterparts running from the other party?
I guess I would say I differ the most from the other from the other party candidates here, is the fact that I'm the only resident of Lincoln. Lincoln is an entire city within our district. It's not divided up between anybody. And I think Lincoln needs somebody strong up in the legislature to make sure that the working class people finally get heard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Doctor?
I'd just like to say that everyone at this forum, we want to do what's best for North Dakota. But how to get there, there's different paths. And being a small business owner, having to come up with payroll, having to help people out, I feel with tax incentives, pro-business attitude, giving back as much as we can in taxes to the people, because it is their money ultimately, and to also make sure that we do have the infrastructure in the West, balance that out. I am fiscally conservative, and that would be the main difference.
Thank you. Mr. Emmer?
Well, three of us at this table lived in the flood zone down near Ponderosa Village. And I don't remember any of us asking somebody if they were a Republican or a Democrat to help somebody move their furniture up to the second floor or throw a sandbag. I believe that in North Dakota, people are still out there trying to do the right thing for the right reasons, and that's what I'm in this for. I think bipartisanship here is a lesson that could be learned by Congress in Washington, D.C. I don't think they can agree on what day of the week it is. By the time they decided it was Wednesday, it would be Thursday. And so it's a real struggle. Now if I can shift gears and talk about the other question. We have oil-producing counties, and they certainly deserve to have oil money coming back to them. We don't disagree with that. But there's oil-affected counties that haven't the same access to that money. Burley County is an oil-affected county. All you have to do is just drive around and look how many oil-fueled vehicles you see parked in people's driveways as we knock on doors and talk to people. The sheriff, Pat Heiner, who's a personal friend of mine, he's got a jail that's just overwhelming. It's just overwhelmed him. He's got 40 or 50 beds contracted out every day. That wouldn't have happened without the oil field. So I think some money, as a first piece of legislation, some money needs to go to oil-affected counties to help them and assist them. That would be my first piece of legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Larson, you're first on this next question. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the state of North Dakota are in a dispute over water rights. The Corps wants to charge users of Lake Sakakawea water for storing it behind the Garrison Dam. What can the legislature do to protect North Dakota water rights from being usurped by the Corps?
That's an interesting proposal. The Corps wants to charge us for water that the good Lord made. They didn't make it. I don't see how they can presume that they can charge us for it. The simple answer to me is absolutely no. You can't do it. You're not going to do it. We will not allow it. Part of this sometimes could be a smokescreen for the Corps to deflect from what the real problems are. Who knows what they're thinking, because they're all over the place sometimes. But the simple answer is no. We're not going to do it, period.
Thank you.
If I can deflect
Yeah.
just to the piece of legislation for a second, there is one I would love to present. It would have to do with paying partial payment on school construction. I have a plan that would come into play where we could help schools with school construction make a significant payment toward it, and it would not take away from other entities, which has been the problem in the past. So I would love to bring that legislation forth.
Thank you. Ms. Pullman?
Well, I am one of the three that Mr. Emmer is talking about who lived through the flood, and I'm still treating carpal tunnel from sandbagging and moving furniture. So I am no fan of the Army Corps of Engineers. Let's just start there. But this policy is ridiculous, that they would charge us for money that is, or charge us for water that is legally ours. I would vote to set aside money for the Attorney General to sue them if they try to do so. So if it takes a lawsuit to get them to stop, that's what I think we should do.
Thank you.
Well, I hate to sound like a broken record, but these two people are right. The water is ours, and nobody should be able to charge us for our own water except the state of North Dakota. We should be charging oil companies for taking water out of the lake. That's our water, and we should be able to use it how we see fit. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is the last question. Mr. Doctor, you're first on this question. Would you favor rejecting federal funds for K-12 education to achieve true local control?
Yes, I would. I believe in local control. I believe we have a good school system in the state, and with the right direction, and hopefully Nicole Pullman is elected as an educator, we'll have insight in order to make sure that we do have proper funding. I just believe in local control. That's my personal belief, that people at the local level know what's best for their schools and not the federal government, so I would reject the funds.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Emmer. Would you reject federal funding so that our schools could have complete local control?
I would answer that yes, from the standpoint that I don't want the federal government to tell us in North Dakota what we should do in the school system. I think school boards are competent, and I would hope it would never come to that, to pass, but I think it would have to be something that, you know, I would feel very uncomfortable having the federal government tell us how we run our schools, you know, just to receive their money. I'd like to address that Corps engineers question, if I may. It might be all right for them to charge us for water, providing that we can charge them for all the water they left in my backyard and every other backyard last year. And maybe they would back up from their question on that. There's, you know, if we figured out how much water they stored on all our yards all the way from here to Missouri, I think they would change their mind.
Thank you.
That was kind of a joke.
Thank you. Dr. Becker.
Thank you very much. I would not hesitate to refuse federal funding so as to maintain local control. Naturally, you can't just do that willy-nilly, assuming that there's good reason that you don't want the feds to have a particular type of control. But much like I would expect I would behave in the legislature with kind of a put up or shut up approach, I can tell you that with Obamacare, for instance, over 3 years, starting this year, I would have the opportunity to get $44,000 of free Obama money in my clinic as a physician using electronic medical records. And I've chosen to not take that because along with federal money, like almost 100% of the time, there are some onerous regulations, restrictions, then they pull back and you're left holding the bag. So although it's enticing to try and get monies, if it completely alters what you believe is right, then you should refuse and make do in other ways.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Larson, you do not get to answer that question. Candidates, thank you for being here tonight. You will now each have 1 minute to provide a closing comment on anything you'd like. Ms. Pullman, you're first on this.
Well, I just want to thank the League of Women Voters, Dakota Media Access, and the Bismarck Tribune for sponsoring this. This is a great opportunity to exchange ideas. I want to thank the people of District 7. I was incredibly nervous to go door to door, that people would slam their doors, that people would yell at me, and I have been so pleasantly surprised by how kind people have been as I have gone door to door. I know that I am not knocking on 100% Republican doors, and 100% of the people that I have met going door to door have been kind and receptive, and I just want to thank the people of District 7 and say that that makes it all the more an honor to be elected. And so I ask for your vote. I would be honored to represent you, and I look forward to the last couple of weeks of the campaign.
Thank you. Mr. Kelsch.
Again, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for coming out and letting us get together tonight. Closing remarks, I guess, would be going back to the city of Lincoln. There are 2,800 people in the city of Lincoln, one of which is myself. The city of Lincoln has been in 4 separate legislative districts for the last 10 years. There has been no real homegrown effort from any legislature willing to run. I would ask the city of Lincoln and the people of District 7 to consider me when they go vote on November 6th, because I am a working class person. I've been door to door. I've attended every Lincoln City Council meeting since February, March, somewhere around there. And I know the people of Lincoln. I know the people of District 7, and I just ask for their support.
Thank you. Mr. Doctor.
I would also like to thank the League of Women Voters for giving us this opportunity. I've had a great experience also walking door to door. I am proud to be a North Dakotan. I had reservations also, but I do officiate football, so it can't be any worse than that. But I will work hard for you if I get in the legislature, and I ask on November 6th, as a strong voice for the Republican Party, I ask for your vote in District 7 House.
Thank you. Mr. Emmer.
I've walked the entire district, not once but twice. I've talked to a lot of people. They've shared concerns with me. I can embrace every one of the concerns they've shared with me. I'd like to share 4 of them with you. One is they want to feel safe in their home and in their neighborhood. And right now with the growth, they're not so sure. They're also down on the river looking for some kind of permanent flood control. The other thing they want is they want to feel good about where their kids are during the day. So they need to have a good K-12 program. They want to have a good pre-kindergarten program and daycare and Head Start. Speaking for myself and other people with a little gray hair like mine, we have elderly parents that we're concerned about. And then finally, we want to have a tax system that's family friendly. If I'm elected to the legislature as senator from District 7, those would be issues that I would definitely take up as a senator. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Becker.
I'd like to thank the league, and I'd like to thank you, Ines. I think you did a great job. I guess it's a pretty clear choice on the type of person that you'd like to vote for, and not so much type. That sounds like it's a personality, but the type of the person with the type of philosophy that you might adhere to. And I intend to be a no-nonsense legislator. I'd like to see changes made in a very responsible manner, and I'm willing to make the sacrifice to leave business for the period of time that session is in to try and accomplish that. And I too have enjoyed going door to door. It's actually been some of those beautiful evenings. It's pretty good exercise. I kind of enjoy it. So anyway, thanks to the voters. Thanks to everyone here. Thank you.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Anessa, for sponsoring us tonight. It's certainly been enjoyable, and we've all learned a lot. I've walked door to door since April. I've been at some doors 2 or 3 times. I've been at every door that I possibly could get to in District 7. I've learned a lot. I've gotten questions. I've gone back to people's homes and answered the questions to which they were rather shocked. I bring the past 2 years of daily legislative experience to the floor. I've worked as an advocate for education in the last 2 sessions, totally every day, long into the night, trying to get things passed, working both sides of the party. I want to be sure that the quality of life in District 7 remains where it is today. It doesn't get better. I'm worried about that. I'm worried about my Paige and Piper, my little grandbabies. I'm worried about your children and grandchildren. I want to be sure that when this is all over, we can know that when the landscape is quiet again, things will be at peace in North Dakota. I hope that I've earned the vote of the people in District 7. I can assure the people of District 7 I will be your independent voice.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Bismarck Tribune, Dakota Media Access, and the volunteers from the League of Women Voters for organizing this forum. Thank you to the viewers at home and to our audience members here tonight for taking the time to learn more about these issues. This program will replay several times on Government Access, Cable Channel 2, and will be available for online viewing at www.freetv.org in the days leading up to the November 6th election. Before we close this candidate forum, I want to remind you that voting in North Dakota is very easy, and you can find voting information in your county auditor's office and from the office of the North Dakota Secretary of State. Thank you, and good night.
enjoyed this program, would like to see it again, or send the link to your friends, it's available at freetv.org.